the experience of entering an industry where you don't really have a background is a very human experience, a struggle, setback, chaos, confusion, self-doubt, and a lot of rejection.
An agency or an external recruiter is more of that hunter, and in-house recruiter is more of that gatherer.
How did you filter candidates for specific roles to find a match?
Now you're looking at thousands of applicants from everywhere in the world, not just geographically where your business is, but everywhere in the world.
The LinkedIn easy apply button, good thing, not such a good thing.
I mean, I might get roasted for this too, but I dislike it so much.
Applicant tracking systems, people going on about how the AI is filtering them out. My understanding is that's not what happens. It's still the old manual filter process, just slightly better UI and slightly better tools to do it, right? What is you seeing?
I need to be very careful about how I deliver this.
Welcome to Easier Said Than Done with me, Zubin Pratap, where I share with you the tens of thousands of dollars worth of self-development that I did on my journey from 37-year-old lawyer to professional software engineer. The goal of this podcast is to show you how to actually do those things that are easier said than done.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Easier Said Than Done and How to Do It. And on today's episode, I'm super excited to have Zafar, who's on the show with us. And Zafar and I connected a few months ago through actually one of my students who got very, very good results. And he connected me with Zafar, and I've been speaking to Zafar on and off, for months now. And I got to tell you, he's one of the most real people out there. Big heart the size of a planet, and really, really good takes on what life is like as a recruiter. But you know what, Zafar, I should shut up. You should take over. Tell us a little bit about who you are, where you are, what you do, man.
Yeah, thanks, man. That's a really nice and really cool intro. Yeah, my name's Zafar Mohammed. I'm based out of Vancouver, BC, Canada. As Zubin mentioned, I've been a technical recruiter for about 10 years now, 5 years specifically in technology. And yeah, we connected a few months ago through a candidate that I was screening for an ML role. And here we are a few months later down the line. I'm really excited to be here. I appreciate you having me, and I'm excited to jam a little bit.
Yeah, no, man, absolutely. And that's right. I think Milos was sort of, got in touch with you in connection with the role. He's doing really well now, so I'm really happy to see. And he's happy, like he's doing really well. So, and he spoke very highly of you, so Zafar, I've really enjoyed getting to know you, man. But I think really what people would love to know today is a bunch of stuff about the reality of the world. Because, as you and I have talked about, we've got an entire generation of people that's coming, 25 to 32, 33, who've been brought up on a social media diet, who've kind of not been given the opportunity to understand how recruitment really works outside of what the influencers say. And you and I are slightly older folks, so slightly more old school in our ways, and we understand how the market works. So, I think a lot of people just go by the two-dimensional portrayal of a TikTok video or an Instagram video. And that's, I believe, quite dangerous to career planning, right? So maybe what we can start with, Zafar, is how long have you been a recruiter?
Yeah, so I actually started my recruitment career back in, aging myself a little bit here, back in 2014. But I didn't start in technology. I started in logistics, production, and manufacturing. It's a different game to technology, obviously. It's very different, but the struggles and the pains are the same. Whether you're recruiting for accounting, finance, or technology, some of the struggles that folks have every day are going to be universal across the board.
So, you made a very, very beautiful and important point. I really hope people catch on, but I'm going to repeat it. So, yeah, logistics recruitment is a different beast and a different game. But the human experience of it and the struggles and the challenges and the obstacles to overcome are the same regardless of which domain it is. That's kind of true, I find, even when I switch from, lawyer to coder, right? It's a completely different game. It's a completely different domain and expertise set. But the experience of entering an industry where you don't really have a background is a very human experience, a struggle, setback, chaos, confusion, self-doubt, and a lot of rejection. Because in some senses, you've changed from a type of recruiter to a completely different type of recruiter, but there are some experiences that are common, right? It's a kind of career change in its own way.
Absolutely, yeah. It's a different type of recruitment. It's a different ballgame. But again, like you said, the struggles are the same. It doesn't matter if you're applying for a very senior software engineer role or a very junior order picker role. You're still going to put an application through. You're still going to have to deal with the hiring manager or a recruiter or go for an interview, and all of the mechanics of it are going to be the same.
Absolutely, and I think again, going back to social media and how sort of TikTok and Instagram makes it look, I think people just gloss over, completely eliminate the reality that the mechanics are fundamentally the same regardless of which industry. Like I see a lot of LinkedIn posts about, for a software engineer, you need to do this. And I'm like, no, you need to do that for anything. It's not unique to software engineering. My classic bugbear is, oh, you need to be a great communicator to be an effective software engineer. And I'm like, you need to be a great communicator to be in the workforce, full stop. Like it's not unique to software engineering. So let me actually ask you another question, right? Like, let's break this down for folks out there. There are, as I see it, broadly two types of recruiters, right? The agency external recruiters and the internal recruiters. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I'd say so. Yeah, I mean, there's agency, there's folks who are in the service, and then there are folks who are serving their business proper. Yeah.
Okay, so if you were to tell someone what the distinction is and why it matters and how the two types have to perform slightly different tasks or roles, they discharge different duties, how would you explain the differences?
Yeah, so I mean, if I was trying to explain agency recruiter versus an in-house recruiter to somebody who had absolutely zero idea of what even recruitment is, I would sort of say, it's like having someone who is working for the team, an in-house recruiter, obviously working for the team, but internally, they have internal, their perspective is a little bit different in that they're more focused on the business itself. They're focused on aspects of the business and how this role will be involved in that business. And they're very much, their goal is to get this person hired. They only work for one client, so they're serving that one team, and that's it. Now, an agency recruiter or a contract recruiter or RPO recruiter, whatever title you want to give them, they may be serving multiple clients. They may be serving one specific client, but they're not necessarily an internal employee of that organization. They're competing for said business. They're competing for candidates in the market, and they're trying to sort of matchmake between their folks and the role that they're working on. They've got a lot of skin in the game, right? As an agency recruiter, because often they're competing for business with other agencies, other service providers. They have to navigate things a little bit differently in that, often they don't have applicants that they have. So they're doing that headhunting. They're messaging you on LinkedIn saying, "Hey Zubin, how's it going? Are you open to something new?" In-house recruiters tend to sort of focus more on the funnel coming in. Who's interested in working for us? If I put a job out, who's going to apply to that role, and who's going to be interested in working for that company? So, and this may not be the perfect analogy, but if you want to sort of look at it as an agency or an external recruiter is more of that hunter, and in-house recruiter is more of that gatherer.
Hi, if you want a no BS insight into how to change your career, whether to code or something else, and how to actually get job opportunities in tech, then please subscribe and like. It's no BS because I have zero incentive to mislead you. I just want to help you and give you tons of value so that you will consider working with me to get to your next career. Take a look at the description text below to learn more about the training I offer. But I do post content here regularly, and by subscribing and liking and hitting that notification bell, you will get to know when I post new industry insights for you. You'll also know within about 3 seconds if you want to learn more, but at least you won't miss out. Oh, and please follow me on LinkedIn too. I pretty much post there every single day. Just look for my name, Zubin Pratap. All right, so please like and subscribe to this channel, and let's get back to the episode.
That's actually a really good metaphor, the hunter and the gatherer, but on the surface of it, that sounds like, okay, the difference is one goes out prospecting, like the external recruiter will go out finding, and the internal in-house recruiter will basically kind of be like a gatekeeper and be a filter and sort of, handle all the inbound requests, right? But from what you're describing, there's a very clear analogy in my mind to sales, where you have the outbound sales and then you have the inbound sales, right? Would you say that there are actually quite a lot of parallels between recruitment and sales?
Absolutely. I think recruitment, our product is people. We're not selling paper or a pen, and not selling physical products, but we're selling people, and we're selling the idea that this person is a perfect fit for your organization. And I know people hate that word. It's a very taboo type word, right? Sales. Oh, I hate doing sales, cold calling. But there is, we're cold calling candidates, and we're cold messaging candidates, and 100%. We're cold calling hiring managers and people that have never heard of who we are and what we do. And that is sales.
Yeah, and so I know there's a taboo around sales, but what I keep telling my students is whether you like it or not, you're in a job market, right? And if it's a market, someone's selling, someone's buying. That's the definition of a market. So you don't have to like sales. You just have to deal with the fact that that's the nature of the marketplace. And so you're an external recruiter, right? You're an agency recruiter.
Correct. Yeah. So I've done both. I was internal for a pretty large health authority here locally. But I think just based on who I am and what I enjoy, agency is what gets going for me. So yes, absolutely, 100% agency through and through.
You say something really interesting that based on who you are. So obviously you have certain values and you have certain temperamental needs and requirements, and your nature is such that you obviously, at least from what I'm hearing, you enjoy agency more than you do in-house, right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So help us understand what those values are that you're able to meet being an agency recruiter versus being an in-house recruiter, because I think seeing it through your eyes and through your values would help people understand there are actually big subjective differences here in the actual experience of it.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's, it's doing a similar function in a completely different setting. For myself, I like to go back to that hunter-gatherer metaphor I used. I like the hunt. I enjoy the hunt. I like the idea of going out and finding people and companies and people that I can connect that I'm responsible for. And if I'm working for one client, I may not get that same type of stimulation, right? It's different clients, different problem. It's a very different game. Again, the role is the same, the responsibility is the same, the functions are the same, but internally you're also dealing with folks in different departments and not just necessarily an agency person. So as an agency recruiter, you deal with your contact, you deal with whomever is, your champion bringing you in saying, hey, we need your support. But an internal recruiter, you're dealing with all the sort of the internal pieces of the business as well. The hiring managers, the executives, the leaders, the finance people. People are very expensive. Talent is the biggest cost any business is going to have.
Yeah,
it's tough when, as an internal recruiter, you're trying to build these teams and you're trying to get, different things happening from different people. But as an agency recruiter, you don't necessarily have that requirement for that due diligence. You simply, what you do is you find a client willing to work with you. You find a client willing to pay you for service, and you go out and execute that service. You're not dealing with the internal red tape.
As an external recruiter, sorry to jump in there, but it sounds like from everything you're saying, your job as an external recruiter, you kind of, what you need to focus on is different from the internal recruiter. Internal recruiter is a lot of stakeholder management, and getting all the buy-ins and the approvals and running through the process, whereas it's an external recruiter, your job is to connect two sides of the market, right? Which is the candidate side and the company that's looking for top grade candidates, right? So that's, you're sort of more a marketplace broker, whereas an internal recruiter is the person that runs the process of recruitment and bringing people into the company. Is that kind of more or less it?
Correct. Yeah, basically. And I think over the last few years, those lines have muddied a little bit. So for startups and scale-ups, a little bit different. Maybe they don't have a built-out recruitment team and they lean on us because it's a simple solution. But yes, fundamentally, what you've described is what I would say is probably the bones and meat of it.
Got it. So this raises some really, really important questions, and I'm glad sort of to dive into this with you. And the reason I think this is important is I keep telling people when I'm coaching them as part of the inner circle that it's not just about the code. You have to understand how recruitment works. You have to understand how the hiring manager is thinking. You have to understand how the recruiter is thinking, and then you have to, I have training in my program about what internal recruiters are looking for, what external recruiters are looking for. I know this because I've been on the recruitment side, not as a recruiter, but I've been on the hiring side in 3 careers in 4 countries, and it's the same, more or less the same principle. There are cultural differences, there are market dynamic differences, but the principles are broadly the same, which is we're moving candidates through from we've heard of them to get to know them, to evaluate them, to decide whether we want them. There's this entire funnel that people are being moved through, and most candidates just don't think about it from the point of view of the hiring side. They only think about it from the point of view of the candidate side. And I think that's a big mistake because you're not understanding the whole process. So question for you, what are you seeing these days, Zafar, that's different from 2014 when you started out? Just to put this in context, in 2014, most people, as I remember it, because that was 10 years ago, LinkedIn was starting to grow. It wasn't what it is today, right? And so back then, how were you finding candidates and how were candidates finding jobs?
Yeah, so totally echo that. 10 years ago was a very different in the recruitment space. I think traditionally, at least where I started and at where I learned and got my training, we had this big database, and everybody that you talked to, everybody that you connected with, whether it was at a career fair or on the street, you manually put their information into this database and you're manually sorting it that way. You're outside of the information that you put in, you have no idea anything else about this person or this human being or what they're about. So that's how we did it. And we made call sheets.
just to jump in there, because the old database style where you manual entered everything into basically a giant spreadsheet, right? Like, but not. Did you add data like, okay, this person knows Java, this person knows HTML? Like, did you add all that metadata about the kind of skills that person had, or was it just literally just contact details and then you didn't have much data?
I think that depends on the recruiter. Some recruiters were going into depth of adding specific details, and some just wanted high level of what do they do, where do they live, what's their phone number, salary
Interesting.
details, like basic information, right? And
Right.
then I think as ATSs became more readily available, they became improved technology. The organization that I was with built their own ATS, and so they factored all of those things in, right? What
Yeah.
about skills? Like, how are we managing skills, and
Yeah.
how are we showcasing that so that when we want to find skills quickly, how do we even manage that?
So that was going to be my next question. So back then, if people weren't completely disciplined about putting in the data about what skills the candidate had, and you had this giant database without the ability to figure out what people had, how did you filter candidates for specific roles to find a match?
Manually go through every single candidate
Oh
and
my
call
god.
them. It was like we literally used to make call sheets, man. That's how it was. It's the database can do some sort of intelligent queries for you. It maybe can bring you 1,000 people, and that's just rough numbers, easy numbers. We can even use 100. Let's say we use 100, and
Yeah.
you're like, cool, okay, I need to get through these 100 candidates, and I'll have to manually go through them and look at their details. And did someone put their resume in? Did someone put the right information in? Does this
My god.
information match up? Is it consistent? Like, there's a lot of admin required that I think a lot of people don't necessarily want to know about, and even recruiters will struggle to get through it because we do a lot of admin. There's a lot of
Yeah.
computer viewing and data verification.
And just again, from an external recruiter's point of view, you now have to work with two sides of the market, right? You have to work with your client, who's your buyer, right? And you have to work with a candidate who's a stakeholder who you're selling to your client, right? Like that's broadly the 3 points to the marketplace, right? So now you've got to stay on top of what the client needs. You have to really understand their needs, their goals, how their business is structured, what kind of skills they're looking for, what kind of culture they're looking for. And then you've got to go to this database that doesn't have a lot of this data and manually work it out. So as I remember, Zafar, back then, like there were fewer applicants per job on average, not because there were fewer people interested, but because the information didn't connect. Like people didn't know about jobs as easily as they find out about them today on LinkedIn, right? And so on average, people were less aware of jobs in the market. I remember looking at local classifieds, newspapers, local job boards, and career sites. Like there wasn't a LinkedIn super aggregator, right? There were a few aggregators. 20 years ago, it was a newspaper ads. Like that's how I, started my career, right? So there was an information problem. Candidates didn't know about roles, and hiring managers didn't know about all the candidates. And there was still, lots of applications in that world. Now, since the information is free, I'm guessing it's just exploded the kind of application levels you're getting. Is that right?
Absolutely. And I think the lines have sort of muddied as well, right? In that you made a good point. A lot of hiring managers didn't know where the applicants were. And so the role of the recruiter at that time was even more valuable in that they connected those two pieces of the coin, right?
Yeah.
Today with technology and LinkedIn and everything being so, I can do LinkedIn Easy Apply and see exactly who's posted this job. And like it's sort of it's again, it's made the access very easy, but now you're looking at thousands of applicants from everywhere in the world, not just geographically where your business is, but everywhere in the world.
Help people understand why this huge volume, this tsunami of indiscriminate applications from around the world has created a problem for you guys.
Yeah, I think it comes down to like funneling, right? If we take the perspective of regardless of whether you're agency or whether you're internal, you're going to have a funnel of applicants come through. And for numbers,
Yeah.
let's use 100. Let's just say we use 100. Okay, cool. So I've come in, I looked at this job. Okay, senior software engineer. I've got 100 applicants sitting there. Now I can do some manipulations with technology and maybe filter out location. Let's say location is important for me. We're in Vancouver. We're a tech hub. I'm going to say I want people who are in BC. So cool, I filter that out. It brings me to 80. So cool, now I know off the top of my head that 20 of these applicants are not in BC. And so 20% of my pool is already not going to bring me value, right? So cool, okay, now not a problem. I've got 80 applicants still that I have to go through. Now,
Yeah.
with higher volume of applicants, the the idea that a recruiter is going to get through every single applicant, although it may be, a pipe dream, that's exactly that. It is a pipe dream. I don't know. I have not met any recruiter who is so on top of applicants, especially right now, simply because there's a very, very high number of them. We're getting thousands of applicants all across the world. Sometimes we're getting multiple applicants, the same applicant with multiple resumes. It happens more
Wow.
often than you think. I think some people have an idea that if I try different CVs, it might work better for me. But we have to filter through all that. Is that even if we're able to leverage the best of technologies, it takes a human being to process that raw data. And processing any raw data through being a human and sort of manual-ish is going to take a significant amount of time. And that's the important piece here, is that hiring is a very time-sensitive thing. People often wanted people yesterday, not, hey, we'll need them in 2 months, but we needed them yesterday. We just realized that now we need to hire. So it's causing a lot of bottlenecks in terms of the admin that recruiters are doing.
And this is the thing I keep telling my students. I'm like, I mean, we're going to talk about this in a moment, but I'm like, if you don't understand what the recruiter's process and situation is, you're not going to be able to optimize yourself to make it easier for them to do their job. I do a lot of training in this, which is why, sort of my students sort of reach out to you as well, is you have to know how to make it easier for the recruiter to consider you. Like, that's the best thing. That's the only thing you can really ask for. You can't guarantee that someone's going to like you. That's not in your control. But how do you at least get on their radar enough for them to put you into the consideration set, which is really the filter. What I tell my students is just think about it this way. Let's assume there are 500 applications for a job. Okay, you are doing incredibly well if you can actually process an application or even just read the resume and understand what's in there. If you can do that in 10 minutes, you're fast. Like, I've never been able to fully absorb a resume in less than 20, 25 minutes, like of careful reading and researching and understanding what they are. Okay, that's good. Let's say 10 minutes, 500 applications, 10 minutes, 5,000 minutes of work for 500 applications. 5,000 minutes is 3.5 whole 24-hour days. So if we started today, we didn't take any toilet breaks, didn't eat dinner, didn't sleep, didn't do anything else, we'd finish 3.5 days from now reading through and fully absorbing 500 applications. Like, it's not human. That's not how it works. Now, you said something really important, that it's time sensitive. So what I don't think a lot of candidates understand is you're not the only ones working for the client, right? You've got other recruiters who are also on the panel in this Hunger Games style race to find a candidate, right?
Yeah, that's often the case. A lot of contingency firms, especially when it comes to hiring, because they have that time sensitivity, because of that urgency, will reach out to multiple firms. And multiple firms, we're all fishing from the same pool. It's not like we have access to a certain pool of people in Vancouver and other agencies are fishing in a different pool. We're all fishing in the same pool. And so we want to make sure that we get out to these folks fast, and the sense of urgency is there, and that we're getting people on the hook and getting them moving. And not only are we talking to people, but we're talking to the right people. If our client has given us a set of requirements and they say, this is exactly what we want, and this sort of comes back to JD, and maybe this is a bigger thing, but often clients want that unicorn. They want that special, or closest to the unicorn as possible. An external recruiter has to add that lens of, hey, will a client pay me for this candidate?
I mean, when you understand how it's working on your side of the fence, I can I'm actually quite sympathetic to the fact that some candidates get, and I think it's the wrong word, they say they're getting ghosted, but I don't think that's right. I think they're falling between the cracks. It's different from being ghosted. Ghosted suggested like an intention to ignore you. I just think it's just not with a volume. It's not possible to respond to everybody. That's not ghosting. That's just, I couldn't get to you. I didn't hear you in all the noise is not the same thing as I'm ignoring you. And I hope candidates really understand that you're probably not being ghosted. What's been happening is there was just so many people smashing that LinkedIn easy apply. And now let's talk about that actually. I've made my views on this very publicly, so I'm going to shut up for a moment. But in your opinion, Zafar, from both sides of the marketplace, the LinkedIn easy apply button, good thing, not such a good thing?
I mean, I might get roasted for this too, but I dislike it so much. I think it's taken something that takes a little bit of time. Applying to roles is not as easy as pressing a button. As much as we'd like to think so, I don't think that's a solution. And it's because my personal belief is that LinkedIn Easy Apply has brought a lot of desperation and despair to folks. Because if I'm on the other side of the coin and I'm thinking, hey, applying should be as easy as pressing this button, my CV goes through, they review it, the thought process and the theory of all that is there. But the reality of it is that what's happening? Or because of this LinkedIn apply, who anybody can apply. Like LinkedIn apply, all you really need is a LinkedIn profile. It doesn't matter how detailed it is.
Correct.
Just press a button and off it goes, right? So if I'm a recruiter and I've received even 50% of my applications are some of these applicants, what is the possibility or the probability of me going through all of these with a fine-tooth comb saying, hey, let me check you guys out? You sort of have to play the numbers of they're probably going to be junk applications, right? Yeah,
and
I really dislike that button, man. I really, really dislike it.
Well, I'm glad you're talking about it, man, because I've been talking about it for a while now, saying the most sewage in the system, the better the filter is going to have to be. And that means there's going to be a lot of people who get excluded because the filters have to be that strong. Because just the sheer volume of junk floating through the river is that high. You're going to have to trap a whole bunch of stuff and accidentally trap the legitimate guys too. And that's a real challenge. So, well, I'm glad you're talking about it, because I think we have a generation of folks who, quite understandably, it's not their fault, sort of grew up with the easy apply button and figured that that's what job applications are. I had a couple of people, I was doing an online Q&A once, and I had some people genuinely confused when I said, hey, how do you think we got jobs before LinkedIn? Like, they'd never thought about it. They're like, how did you get jobs before LinkedIn? I said, we went old school. We pounded the pavement. We found out who was hiring. We went to newspaper classifieds. And there wasn't this obsession with working remotely back then. We went to our own backyard and did the rounds, the old hardcore old school way. I'm not saying we have to do that now, but the downside with the easy apply button, exactly as you said, is that there's no controls about who can apply. Like, so continuing that in that vein of things that we wish candidates really understood about how recruitment works, let's talk about remote work, man. Like, what's the real deal with remote work? People seem to think that it's only working from home, or that it's working from anywhere on a beach in Bali. Like, what do you see happening with this entire remote work thing? And how would you define remote work?
Yeah, so for me, remote is remote. Whether you're on that beach in Bali or whether you're at your home office or a coffee shop, remote is remote. I know that each company has sort of different opinions and policies on what remote is and how much work you can work remotely and where you can physically work remotely. And some companies don't care. We'll meet quarterly somewhere. Personally, myself, we've been remote much longer than the pandemic. Our business is one of the few where we've been remote for a very long time. And so we had that taste of working remotely or working from that coffee shop. And so I think for us, remote is not a new phenomenon, but I did see through the pandemic, obviously, how quickly it accelerated and how many companies were jumping on that and saying, hey, we're going to work remotely. But I also see the flip side of it now is how many more in-office mandates are coming and more, hybrid, but, very scheduled type of hybrid. Hey, you have to be in X, Y, and Z days. And some smaller companies are forcing, hey, you have to be in 5 days a week because we want to be able to get together and jam together and process ideas. And it's easier when we're together. For myself, back to sort of circle back to the question, I think hybrid is a perfect model, man. And for a long time, candidates were only applying to remote roles. Oh, I only want something that's fully remote. And slowly, as those roles are progressively going away, the fully remote companies, I don't imagine they have a lot of difficulty hiring, generally, and this is a general statement, but everyone wants to work for a remote job. It's simply the fact. You talk to candidates, and I can promise you 75, 80% of them would prefer a remote role over a hybrid role or an in-office role. But that is now changing. The 4 years of us all sitting at home and having these cool offices, it's changing. Companies are changing. Fortunately or unfortunately, whichever side of the coin you're on, the companies are the ones that pay our bills. And so we have to sort of adhere our expectations or temper them a little bit, right? It's cool. Okay, if I haven't had a job for 7, 8 months, going on 12 months, whatever the case is, I'm going to have to temper my expectations a little bit. If I want something that's fully remote and I've been trying and can't get it, would I be open to something that's more hybrid? Would I be open to something that, okay, maybe it is in office, but maybe it has some flexibility? I think that piece is coming back. And
100%.
What is the most important to you? Finding that remote role that's perfect, or finding some type of role where you get some income in, continue your career development, and wait for that perfect remote role to come up. It's pros and cons.
100%, and it is going back to what we talked about earlier. This is a marketplace, which means there has to be the meeting of the demand and the supply at a common intersection point. Now, I happen to work fully globally remote, But I honestly don't believe I would have been able to compete for that kind of role had I not had Google behind me. Like, had I not had Google on my resume. Now, that helped me just stand out a little bit from the competition. And so I was able to compete with some really outstanding people for this kind of role. And that's pretty rare. Like, I keep telling people, that's not normal. Like, I probably represent 0.0001% of the total market in terms of being able to do this, because, a few thousand people out of 50 million developers working truly globally remotely is a tiny fraction. It's so small. The vast majority of people don't do it, and hybrid's probably more likely to be the norm. And even that's really nice to have, but I can see why, like, Google doesn't do remote. 90% of Google's workforce will not be remote because they want people in the office. They believe in that, like, as you said, in that jamming, in that serendipitous exchange of ideas, and the culture and all of that. I did a podcast recently, actually, Zafar, about the 10 skills that because I've been working with globally distributed teams since 2011 now, right? So while my team was locally, maybe a lot of my stakeholders were across different time zones. It's been like that when I was in the law, when I'm here, etc., in engineering and all of that. And there are 10 skills that people don't realize they need to have to, in addition to their core skills, to do remote work well. Now, I'm sure you've seen this as being a remote worker, but it has to do with being organized, seeing around corners, communicating properly, setting context correctly, asking for context correctly, planning your work, knowing that other people are not going to be synchronously on. Like, there's a whole bunch of, and then being visible, making sure your work is visible to other people who need to know about it. Like, there are all these skills that people don't realize. But, going back to what we wish candidates knew about the reality of recruitment that they don't, let's talk about this doom and gloom situation about a down market, man. Like, I know everyone talks about the tech down market, but the market as a whole is down. Non-tech workers have been laid off in droves, but the media doesn't cover it because they're not on the NASDAQ. So when you encounter a candidate or someone who's watching this, an aspiring coder who has never been through a down cycle before, what would you tell them to pay attention to in terms of what they see in the social media, and what should they ignore? Like, what's the reality of it?
Yeah, I'm really glad we came to the economics of it, because the economics of it are so important. It's like you said, like, tech has never experienced this type of situation.
Correct.
Tech has, but every other industry has. Every other industry, from manufacturing to finance, operations, they've all had ebbs and flows. And so this is the real first ebb that technology is feeling. And a lot of these workers haven't felt that. Right? They've been earning very high salaries for a very long time. They've built these certain lifestyles, and they've never, no one ever thinks that these companies that are getting billion-dollar valuations, that are raising money left, right, center, that are hiring, that they're gonna get stuck. And the fact of the matter is, a lot of them did. Majority of them did. I think of the big FANGs, I think Apple was the only one to not do a mass layoff, because again, Apple's a little bit different. I think we'll put an asterisk on them, but everyone experienced it, right?
I was looking at the actual data, and most of them were not engineers. So only about 40% or something were engineers. The remaining 60% was sales and recruitment. Like, that's how big the layoff. It wasn't just tech; it was everybody.
That's exactly it. And the tech was highlighted. Oh my God, all these technology workers, engineers laid off. But recruiters, recruiters were slashed the first people.
In FANG and all the FANG companies, it was recruiters, sales, and engineers in approximately equal thirds. So basically, that means 60% were not engineers, because 60% were sales or recruitment. And that's what I keep telling. Just because it happened in the tech sector doesn't mean it's just engineers. It's happening to everybody.
Everybody. I think that's the thing. And I think sort of as people, as a recruiter, like, that empathetic voice of like, yeah, you know what, as a senior engineer who's never been laid off before, you're not the only one. And I think the other piece of it also is, some of these folks, especially on the engineering, recruiting, and sales side, they're very high earners, right? Some very senior engineers make very, very high salaries. And when it comes time to cut costs, we talked about it earlier at the start of the chat, talent is your most expensive expense. So we've got to get rid of some of these people who are making very high salaries. Recruiters, salespeople, they're commission focused, they earn a lot. Engineers as well. There's a reason why the 10x engineer verbiage exists, because there are engineers that are able to bring in that type of revenue based on what they're able to do, and they earn a lot of money.
That's the key there, Zafar, is that it's not that they're just earning a lot of money. It's because the things they do produces 10x the revenue. So. Correct. 9x the company keeps, 1x they give to the engineer. It's very rare that someone can actually produce that kind of revenue impact, because a lot of engineers end up working in cost center roles and then wonder why they don't end up earning those those salaries, it's because they're not in the revenue center side of the business.
Correct. That's exactly it. Again, it's down to the economics, right? Is that even engineers are required to make things work and keep things on, keep the lights on, but it's the engineers that are producing, the money making products that are earning that crazy amounts of money. And we sort of have to software engineers become such a big, broad job title now, and everyone's an engineer but they're all doing different functions, right? And so that's something else that I think if I was laid off right now and I was an engineer and I was looking at sort of what's next for myself, that is something that I would keep front of mind for me, is that when this happens again, not if this happens again, but when this happens again, which side of the coin do I want to be on? Do I want to be on the side where I'm in a position where I am creating some type of dollars for the business? So if I do get laid off, I can value that in my CV and say, listen, even if you pay me $100K a year, easy numbers, right? Let's just use $100K a year. I have experienced and I can demonstrate that I can bring you $1 million a year because of this thing that I can do, right? So that's what I would do. And a lot of people just don't know that. They just don't know that, hey, an engineer can do that? What do you mean? Like, I thought we just go, we do this, and we call it a day.
Dude, this is the stuff that I didn't learn in college as well, but I learned about this during the financial crisis and then later on, because I've been laid off in my career as well, before I was an engineer. And that I realized that the roles that get laid off, because I've been on both the laying off, the management side of the decision side of the layoff and on the receiving side. And I'm like, now I get it. If you're in a cost center and it's expensive, you're probably going to have a target on your back compared to someone in a revenue center. This has nothing to do with engineering. This was in the law and then later in the executive world. And I'm like, that makes perfect sense, actually, because ultimately we're here to make revenue because that's how we get our salaries paid. And if our work is not getting our salaries paid, we're going to have to be axed, and that's what happens. Now, there's something really interesting. So obviously when I became an engineer, I was aware of all this, and you can't always control that. But as part of your career plan, you want to try and get closer to the revenue centers or the growth areas. And this is something people don't realize. I have a friend of mine from Google, and she got laid off, and she's a pretty senior engineer, really great person. And she got laid off. She got a 6-month severance or whatever they were giving at that point in time. And then she got hired back 4 months later for 25% more, right? In a different part of Google. And this is what I keep telling people, just because we see the layoff numbers, we don't see the rehire numbers. Yeah, it's a smaller percentage, but what's actually happening is not that engineers are not wanted, is that business unit was not performing well and had its funding cut. And now those people need to be reabsorbed either on other parts of the company or on other parts of the economy. But it's not that engineering's in trouble, it's that business was not performing well. Would you agree with that as a recruiter?
Absolutely. Especially as you get larger in different businesses. Google's a great example because they've got multiple business units, and if the body part is not working, cut it off and reallocate, right? It's pretty basic. And when you break the economics of it down, it's very easy to see, right? If I put a spreadsheet in front of you and said, Zubin, we've got 10 departments, 3 departments are making money, 7 are not, you're going to be like, crap, we need to get rid of those 7, right? Because they're just not making money. It's the fact
exactly of people cancel their various streaming connections is because they're like, I watch a lot of Netflix, I don't watch a lot of ABC or whatever it is, and so I'm going to cut that one because it's not a great use of my money. I'll allocate that capital to something else, right? We all do this in our home budgeting, and we don't fully understand that it's the same thing happening in big corporates, just bigger numbers, like more zeros. That's the big difference, right?
That's exactly right.
That's so good to hear you say that. Okay, so down cycles, it's going to happen. It happens to everybody. It's not that the profession's at risk. Yeah, times are tight, but then the cycle will change. We've always seen this. Now, next question, I'm mindful of time, so because we're having such a great conversation, I've got so much to ask you. But as quick as you can make it, because I know you got to go as well. This is really important to me because this is what I spend a lot of my time with my students. When hiring managers are looking at candidates, what's going through their mind about risk? Now, I know what I do when I'm hiring, but I want to hear from your point of view because you see a huge breadth of the market. How do hiring managers look at candidate risk? Meaning when a candidate applies to them, how are they assessing the risk of one candidate over another when making recruitment decisions?
Yeah, so risk right now, I think, is a pretty big one. I think traditionally when hiring managers look at risk, they look at risk for themselves and their department. And they also look at risk for budget, right? Are they using a recruiter? They're going to have to spend a lot of money. But when it comes to the candidate specifically, they're going to look at who's jumped around a little bit. If I've got 100 applicants and of the 100, 20 have jumped around a little bit over time. Maybe they wanted to earn more money or a different title, or whatever. And that's high risk for me. They may take off again, and I'm doing this all over again. You know.
Mm-hmm.
Also, and I think the flip side of that also is true, and that's something that a lot of people don't have sort of a lens for. In that, if someone spent 10 years at one organization, how hard is it going to be to break those habits that they've learned over 10 years and introduce new ones that we are functioning? So there's also a piece of risk there, is that they've been at this company for 10 years, maybe finally that business couldn't sustain them. They had to lay them off. They don't know what to do because shit, I've been at the same place for 10 years. But that's a piece of risk as well, is that how are they going to be adaptable? Are they going to be people that can change their shifting? Because for the last 10 years, they haven't had to. So as much as, yes, jumping is very risky, and people are like, oh, the short stints here, short stints there. Like, sometimes longer stints also have a negative connotation. Now, I'm not saying every hiring manager adopts this mentality. A lot of them are saying, wow, like 10 years, amazing. I'm going to get 10 years out of you. But we have to ask questions on both sides. We can't assume, especially in a hiring situation, because again, hiring is so expensive, biggest expense. Like, poor hiring decisions cost companies a lot of money and time. And that's just this resources they don't have. So it's very risky for them too. And hiring managers like to make the safe call, right? They like to make sure that they bring in somebody who they know is going to do well. It's not going to cost them an arm and a leg, and that they can effectively manage, right? Like, it's cool, even keel. Like, if we break the population into the 80-20 rule of 10% being extremely high performers, everybody wants them, the lowest 10 being nobody wants them, and then the 80 in between, I'm sure a lot of hiring managers will say, I'll take an 80 over a 10, either 10 any day of the week, right? So that's risk for them as well, especially when it comes to scale, and you're hiring at scale, and you're examining all of these resumes, because you're not just hiring for one position where you may have some luxury of, okay, well, I'm going to do a few interviews, I'm going to make sure I get the right hire. But when you're hiring at scale, and maybe you need to hire 5, 6, 7, 9, 10, whatever that number is, you're going to make the safest, less risky decision as you can, because you have to recreate that decision multiple times during the scale. So that's also something that hiring managers are going to consider, is who's going to be, the safest hire for me, and who's going to make sure that the job gets done, business is happy, and in 6 months I'm not having to come to them because of performance issues, or because the business has died and I have to lay them off again. I think that's something, and not to sort of sidetrack, but that is something hiring managers are being cognizant of. Is nobody likes to do layoffs. No hiring manager goes into their job every day and says, yes, I want to lay people off today, right? So they're being very, very, very tough when they hire. They want to make sure they get the hire right. They want to make sure that the risk is averse absolutely completely as possible, whether they're paying a fee or they're not paying a fee. They have to consider all these things. So when people are like, I've sent 100 applications in, I've done 10 rounds of interviews, we sort of don't know what's happening in the back end of it. Maybe the recruiter knows, maybe the hiring manager knows, maybe the hiring manager is trying to make something happen. We don't know, and that is all risk for the hiring manager, and they're the ones absorbing this risk, right?
Oh, totally, and they're the ones that hold the can for it, because if it goes wrong, they could get fired. It's their reputation on the line, right? So the serious consequences of getting it wrong. So, and this is something, because I mainly mentor and coach. Well, I have two types of people who come to me. Either people who've been through the boot camps, which was 40% of the people in the last 20 months have come to me, boot camp graduates who couldn't crack it into the market, and then there are others who are starting from zero. And I help both. They need totally different plans, though. And I keep telling them, your biggest obstacle will be, how do you show the hiring manager that you're not at risk? Because, and you correct me if I'm wrong, but from the data I've seen, most applicants to a job are qualified and not career changers. Like, they got formal qualifications or work experience on the board in that role, and they're not actually switching careers. What's your experience about the risk of a career changer, and how to overcome that?
That's very high risk. When you're switching careers in this type of market, it's very, very high risk. Like, if we were to play the scenario out of, okay, Zubin is the hiring manager, Zafar is the candidate. I've had a 10-year experience in recruiting. Decided, recruitment's not for me. I want to be an accountant. I've done all the education. I've done all the theory. Now it's time for me to go and apply those skills. I've applied to your accountant role. I'm like, Zubin, you should hire me. I've got no experience, but I'm going to be great. I promise you.
Yeah,
Awesome.
yeah.
Zafar, I
Ambitious,
love
yeah,
your
I'm
attitude.
ambitious, but
Yeah,
I've
yeah.
got
I love
experience,
your
yeah.
attitude. But if there's an accounting mistake that happens, it's going to cost my company millions of dollars.
Yeah,
Therein lies the risk, right?
yeah.
And as someone who is shifting careers, the reality of that experience is going to happen to me maybe every second time I apply to a role has to
Oh,
be there,
easily,
right?
easily.
And even as a recruiter, like when I review some of these resumes, I try my best if I'm getting on a screening call with them to articulate that of, I hope you understand that, as someone who is shifting careers, and we see it a lot right now with engineers, and I'm talking professional engineers moving into technology. So maybe some oil and gas people who oil
Yeah.
and gas isn't necessarily advancing. So they make that pivot and they assume because they've got 15, 20 years of engineering experience that it'll translate right over.
No, it
Or
doesn't.
they can become a product manager overnight. Like it's not the same, right? Theory
No.
is theory, application is application. So
But
um,
there's also another reason from a hiring manager that I've seen, because I've been on the hiring side for people who are just switching careers and stuff, is that quite simply, the hiring manager has options. They have alternatives which are far less risky. So why would anyone take the risk? Right? You have to really work hard. And that's what I had to do when I was 38 and I moved from law to engineer, is I had to show all the hiring managers that I was no more risky than any of their other alternatives, and I had the transferable skills. Right? I had to level the playing
absolutely.
field on the risk and show that I had valuable skills that other did. And that's what I train my students to do. And that takes time, man. Like that takes time and focus.
It's not easy. I mean, it again comes back down to the economics of it, right? Is like
Correct.
how even someone with 1 year of experience is going to be more
Risky.
valuable than someone at a career change, right? Like the learning
Correct.
curve is so steep versus someone that's done
Correct.
it. So like as someone who would switch their careers, you, like you did, you have to sort of fight it out front of, hey, I know I'm switching careers, but you have to be able to demonstrate with data, and not just
Yeah.
say, hey, I can do this, because everyone's going
Yeah.
to say, hey, I can do this, but how can you demonstrate to a certain degree that I can do what you're asking me, or you're
Yeah.
asking of me, sorry.
And going back to what we talked about at the start of this, like, because there is an economic principle here, and I learned how to do that de-risking process when I was doing my startup, and I was basically producing a new product in a space that had competitors. And the big question is, why would the customer switch? Right? It's exactly the same principle. Why would a hiring manager take a chance on a new product, being you, when you're completely new to the field, when they've got established products that they already have reputationally de-risked in the marketplace because other people use them? It's the same reason, like if a restaurant has customers in it, we're more likely to think it's good than it's if the restaurant's empty. We don't actually know
100%.
whether they're good, but we're going to go by the evidence, the social data around it, and say, oh, okay, that one's empty, that one's full, the full one must be better. It's the same principle with hiring. Is if someone's got a track record, we assume that they're better, even though the actual new candidate may be way better, in terms of pure technical
100%.
skills, attitude, right? So it makes perfect sense. So I'm glad you share that point of view, because I keep telling folks, especially those that go to boot camps, like boot camps are great, they'll teach you how to code, but there's a big missing piece. Is you have to individualize your application strategy to who you are and who the hiring manager is. Otherwise, you're just not going to make it through. You've absolutely got to, and you've got to make it de-risk for people like you as well, the recruiter, because you have reputations in the line. You're running a race. You've got competitors out there fishing from the same pool, and you've got massive numbers to sort of deal with. And I have to stand out enough to get your attention to say, Zafar, I'm worth your time, and I'm not a risk.
Yeah, I think that's sort of nail in the coffin right there. Is often recruiters are the first line of defense, right? And in order to get to that hiring manager, you have to not only demonstrate that in your CV, but convince us, who it's our jobs to assess you. As much as we think we are matchmakers, we evaluate people. That's what we do. We evaluate your skills, your characteristics, your personality, and we have to have a good evaluation of you that what you are worth the risk. And
Yeah.
maybe 2 years ago, more people would be open to taking that risk. There was a high demand for talent, a lot of open roles, growth was happening. You know what? Cool. I'll hire somebody with no experience, and we'll learn along the way. Right now, there's a major influx of experienced talent in the market.
Correct.
And now, when you have experienced talent in the market, there are people who have that know-how already. And
Yeah.
You're right. I, as a hiring manager, I've sort of got pick of the litter. Like,
Yeah.
cool. Okay,
Right
I can take a look at all of it and see. Yeah, you're good, and no, you're not as good.
And the same thing happened, in the financial crisis, which was much worse than it is now. And I think, I was already 4 years into law at that time, and I lost so many colleagues. I was one of the last people left standing, but that's because I had learned that you have to show value in ways that other people aren't in order to hold on to things in a down market. And a lot of my colleagues, very senior lawyers, were spilt into the market, and it took them months and they were experienced lawyers. Took them months to get back in because it was a down cycle. In a good cycle, they get back absorbed in very quickly, but in a down cycle, it's bad. And so cycles will change. Like right now, things aren't great. But that's why I keep telling my students who join me now, I'm like, in 12 months, the market will change because these cycles come and go. And then you'll have another 10, 15-year boom, and a bull run. And that's great because you're starting at the bottom of the market and you're not in any rush to get in there, and you're willing to let the cycle take its time, but you're preparing. You're using that time to prepare really well. And then you can ride the next big wave, but you have to do it super intentionally. You have to understand the risk. You have to understand the marketplace dynamic. So, man, thanks for sharing your views on that. That's really awesome. Now, just two more questions before I let you go. One, and you can give a yes or no answer, or you can sort of give a slightly more nuanced answer. But ATSs, applicant tracking systems, people going on about how the AI is filtering them out. My understanding is that's not what happens. It's still the old manual filter process, just slightly better UI and slightly better tools to do it, right? What is you seeing?
I need to be very careful about how I deliver this, but in my experience, I have not found an ATS that can do that type of filtering that candidates are thinking about through AI. And if there is one, please send it to me because I want it. My fingers hurt from doing all the work. Like I've yet to find it.
Right.
There is a place for AI in ATS. ATS give you functionalities and ability to sort of decipher some things, look for things, but there's no such ATS that I'm aware of. And from the ones that I've worked with quite a few. I've worked with all the big players. I've worked with small players. I've worked with personalized ATSs that is going to completely filter you out. Because I think we have to sort of think about the flip side of this also is everybody wants data. Every company out there knows data is very valuable. So every ATS also wants your data. They want your CV. They want your resume. They want your details. They want your experience. There's no reason for them to filter you out completely, right? Because their product market fit when they go to companies and say you should use our ATS is we've got all these different avenues, and you can have this data, that data, salary details, this detail, that detail. Like that's their value prop. So there's no reason for them to filter you out. But yes, no, I don't believe AI is doing anything like that.
So it's still the recruiter then that needs to apply the filtering layer to say, well, what does my client need? What do the candidates have? And how do I sort of narrow it down to the candidates who are the right fit? Because you're racing the clock here, right? And you got to find them.
There's always a person. There's always a human, whether a recruiter, hiring manager, an HR person. There's always a human.
Always a human. All right. No, that's the key message I wanted people, because that was my experience too. I'm like, I don't know, you guys have started inventing this mythology around, AI ATSs that are, after you and want to sort of exclude you. And I'm like, it's not that. You would have been excluded anyway if you weren't the right fit. So it's nothing's really different. Now, last question for you, man, and you can get on your soapbox as much as you like here, right? But I want to be respectful of your time. You ready?
Hit me. Let's do it.
I don't even know what this is about. Yeah, fair enough. Social media / influencer culture. What impact is this having on candidates and applicant expectations that you really wish, man, it wasn't like this?
I think it's skewing the reality of things. I think even if we look at, how many people become social media influencers, it's only the top % of humans who are able to gather that type of following. And so it doesn't work for 90% of the population, and as much as we think we are the top %, there's probably 10 other better Zafars out there that I'm just unaware of. And so I think it skews expectations. I think it creates false realities. And it gives them an idea of it's quite easy out there if you do X, Y, and Z because I did it, And I don't think that's the case. Everyone has their own journey. You've got your own personal journey, which is very different than someone else's. And when someone sort of takes on that journey and embraces that journey, I think that's when they find success. Is there's no map to glory, but I know I can pave the way myself. So I don't think they're doing a service, these social media influencers. I don't think they're doing an effective service to the people who are really down and out and need support and maybe are looking for some tricks and tips. But they really do a damn good job of creating a false idea of what it can be, what it maybe should be. I don't know. It's it's tough. Like I said, it just doesn't work for 90% of the population.
No, and this is exactly why, people are like, well, why do you do personal coaching? Why don't you just do a bunch of courses? And I'm like, because the people who actually succeed, not there's so much diversity in people and their circumstances and their markets that they're in and the skills that they have and how they think and the background and whether they're married and kids. There's just so much diversity in the pool that assuming that there's a one size fits all is a huge mistake. There just can't be. There just can't be. And so that's why I personalize things for everybody. I give no two students of mine have the same curriculum, no two students of mine have the same coaching, because they're all in different contexts, circumstances, mindsets, beliefs, habits, experiences, all of that. And you've got to work with what they've got to take them from A to B. In my case, from A to Z, like I have to take them all the way there. And this is what upsets me about the way the influencer culture is having an effect on people is exactly as you said. They believe that the influencer is, or that blog or whatever it is the actual answer, whereas all it is a clue to something that may work, but chances are it's not going to work for you in your circumstance without adaptation. Right? Would you agree with that overall summary?
I absolutely would. I echo that, and I there's a lot of good information out there on social media, right? Like it's not to say that every piece of information is incorrect, but I think something that you touched on really hits is that personalized piece of it. That information that you're digesting and receiving, how does that apply to you? How does that apply to me specifically? And can I use it? Like, is this going to be functional for me? So it's just too bad there's no disclaimer at the beginning of a TikTok, right? Saying, this may or may not work for you, but I wish they did more of a service than a disservice, because some of these social media influencers have so much power, and I use power not in a negative connotation, but in a sense of like they could do really some good. If someone went on there and said, hey, listen, this may not work for 90% of the people out there, but as long as you get started, that it may work. How many more people are going to be receptive to that versus I more clicks and this is what it's going to be, right? So
I don't know, man. I kind of think it's partly the nature of the human mind is we want the quick fix, we want the formula, we want the one thing that'll make it so easy for us, gift wrap it and bow tie it for us, and so we're naturally drawn to these 10 things you need to do to become a coder this year, 5 languages you must learn, that kind of bullshit, and so we get drawn to that stuff because we think there's an easy solution and we want it yesterday. I mean, that's the entire reason why in the fitness industry in the US, for example, supplements is 4 times bigger than the gym industry. It just tells you a lot, that this is how human nature is. We want the quick fix without the effort. And so the downside of the influencer culture is in 30 seconds, you can only sell the quick fix. You can't actually sell the whole story. You can't. There's too much nuance to it. So are you seeing different applicant behavior because of this social media sort of trend the last 6 years, or would you say applicant behavior is unchanged?
I think it's generally similar. I think applicants are applicants. I think sometimes specific nuances may change. I think, a lot of tactical things that applicants maybe were doing before are not necessarily happening now. I think, a lot of these influencers are ditching the cover letter, right? So the cover letter is not something that people are using regularly anymore. And they're, something that I'm seeing a lot of is, create a portfolio, in lieu of a CV, or like different alternatives or like creative solutions. And that's all good and great, but understand that as people who are hiring you, we still need the meat. Bones are cool. Yeah. You can style them up as much as it looks nice and aesthetically will be beautiful, and we'll appreciate that beauty. It's not to say we won't. We'll be like, yeah, this looks really cool, but the meat is important. And I think the meat a social media influencer can't provide. You've got to figure out what your meat is and put that in your sandwich.
What would you say is the meat in this example? Like, what is it? What is the substance that, and not just the lipstick? What's the substance?
I think the substance is really being able to use data around specific projects that you have completed that you want to highlight, right? If we continue to use the career changer example, which I know a lot of your students are, it's about, okay, cool. If I'm not able to fill a 5-page CV of buzzwords and jargon and all this technology that I think will get picked up by this AI ATS, have real projects in there. Have real things, real links that people can click on, or or they can go to and they can see demonstrations of your ability, whether that's GitHub contributions. I think as someone who is career changing, and this may be if there's one caveat to take from this whole chat, it's GitHub contributions, especially as a new engineer. That's what's going to get you noticed by recruiters. Is cool. Okay, cool. You've changed your career. So what? A lot of people do it. But are you actively developing yourself? And GitHub is the easiest, most public place to see that. And if a new developer is not, I wouldn't take that chance on that. Absolutely. I know some recruiters, maybe they will, but I know a lot of my clients won't. And so I would be doing you a disservice getting you excited about a role. And then ultimately you get declined because I probably knew from the jump that, it's just not there. So that's what I would do. Let's say your CV's not a lot of bones, no meat. That let's create some meat through there. Let's put some of that GitHub contributions in there, and let's put some of the projects that you're in there. Even some of the side hustle stuff. You talked about at the top of the hour, like a side project that I'm coding on. Like, put that in there. I want to see what you're doing, and I want to see the type of work that you're doing, because maybe something sticks. But if you're not putting it in there, and your resume is all jargon and buzzwords and things that you think that the recruiter is going to get excited about because you looked at the JD and it said, we want AWS, or we want GCP, or we want Azure, and we want DevSecOps, and we want this, and you're like, this is what I'm putting in there, but you're not able to demonstrate how that works. Maybe you get an interview, but you won't get a job.
So that raises an interesting point to loop back to what you said earlier. The hiring side, hiring managers, the clients are always looking for unicorns, and we know unicorns don't exist. So, and there's a popular trope about, you want just, a beginner with 10 years of experience. You're looking at entry-level roles with 5 years of experience and all that stuff, right? So let's break it down really real, and then I'll let you go, man. But it's, if there's somebody who looks at a role, and I notice this especially some of my female students, they tend to over-disqualify themselves much more than the male students will. But, there's a role that says is listed this laundry list of 10 buzzwordy skills and tools and frameworks and, sort of cloud providers or whatever. And let's say a person knows 3 or 4 really well and doesn't know the other 6 or 7 of them. Would you say that they should pretend, or at least throw all those words into their resume and learn a little bit? Or would you say it doesn't matter if you don't know the 6 or 7, just go really deep on the 3 you do know and really make that stand out? What would you say?
I would be more likely to choose the latter versus the former, but I would address my lack of ability or skill in some of the required stuff and demonstrate how I'm learning that. So, it's easy to say, hey, I don't know JavaScript, but, I'm willing to learn, versus saying, hey, you know what? I'm working with Java today. I'm very good at Java. I've worked with Python. I'm learning JavaScript and I'm learning Node on the back end. And here's a demonstration of how I'm learning that. Right. Because again, these hiring managers, not only are they hiring you for your skills, but they're seeing how is that skills going to translate when I bring you into production. So I need to be able to see, and let's sort of look at it from an engineer perspective. How do I take it from gathering requirements and getting the top end to then filtering it through all the way, right? So sort of same thing.
100%. And I think on that note, we can wind it up because I hear your kids calling you and it's time for you to go.
Yeah, I was going to say, there you go. Yeah, you might hear my son in the back. I think he knows that it's time up, but sorry, I got to run.
I know, man. Sorry, I kept you back late, dude. I kept saying I'm going to try and let you go. And the problem, I blame you because you're interesting and you know shit. Now, what can I do about that, right? So
yeah, listen, I'm not going to give you a hard time for that one. I'll let you pump my tires anytime, man.
Man, Zafar, thank you so much for taking out the time from your day and away from your family.
Yeah,
please express my gratitude to your wife and your kids as well. And thank you so much for sharing your perspective. It's been a real pleasure, man. And I really hope more people understand where you're coming from and hear you on this because it's really important. So thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you very much.
All right, man. I'll let you go. Have a great weekend. Take care.
All right. Bye.
Do it. Just subscribe. You know you got to do it.